Bruce, thanks for joining us. Tell me what's up with LSU at Florida. Is it postponed or is it canceled?
Well, technically it's postponed, Dan, but for the time being, it feels like it may be canceled. Right now, I think the biggest issue here, and obviously safety is at a premium when it came to this hurricane. But what the SEC and certainly Florida's AD Jeremy Foley did was essentially, played this thing out and let it get to the point where it was either it was either going to be in Gainesville or not at all. And whatever the contingencies were, they just let this thing drag on and on too long where they had no other options this weekend. And so, if you look back 10 years ago when it was Hurricane Rita, it was right on the heels of Katrina, Mike Slive stepped in, the SEC commissioner at the time, and moved the LSU-Tennessee game, which was a homecoming game, to a Monday night and switched it. In this case, Greg Sankey let the ADs kind of point fingers, and it turned out to be a big mess. And I ultimately, talking to people within the SEC footprint, they're like, you know what, this wouldn't have happened if Mike Sly was still running the show, but Greg Sankey, the new commissioner, just really got himself behind the eight ball.
Okay, but is this a situation with neither team wanting to have a loss? Granted, Florida's losing home revenue, but also, if they have one less game, that means one less loss for these two schools. Does that matter at all?
Well, I think this matters. This is a bigger issue than just Florida and LSU because it affects both division races. Tennessee, which has already beaten Florida, could end up, if they have played one more game and Florida doesn't have that loss, the head-to-head becomes a moot point. And so Florida would go to the SEC title game. Hypothetically, again, this is a big if, but if LSU wins out and were to beat Alabama, who has to go to Baton Rouge this year, even if LSU had beaten Alabama, that head-to-head could cost them. The fact that it would be just, non-existent. So not only does this affect these two schools, but it really has it affects the whole sport of college football because of the SEC and because of what it means to both divisional title races.
What if Texas beats Oklahoma?
I think you'll hear a lot of the Charlie Strong is getting fired talk will be put on the back burner for a while. I really do. Just as it relates to that story, I had talked to some folks inside the Texas program over the weekend, and they said, really, if he could have gotten the team to 7-5, that would have been a 2-win improvement from last year. They know the team is really young. They felt like Charlie Strong would have been safe, and he was on the right track. Now, a lot of those people feel like he needs to win 9 games as opposed to 7. And I said, well, what changed? And the answer was LSU changed. LSU job came open. They fired Les Miles. Tom Herman's window of where he would be, it would have changed in a lot of people's minds down there. Tom Herman's a former Texas graduate assistant. So it's gotten very messy down there for Charlie Strong, and the pressure is very real. He's obviously he demoted his defensive coordinator and has taken over the play calling himself. So, the pressure is real. It's only year 3, though, and I'll say this: whoever is coaching Texas in 2017 is going to get a loaded team because it's a very young team, and they were probably a year away from being top 15, top 10 caliber.
We just had Tom Herman on last hour, the Houston head coach. Why do we assume that he will leave Houston?
Dan, I think Houston's become a very good job, and I know Tom really likes it there. But if anybody thinks that a coach who's going to stay at Houston, which in all likelihood is not going to get into the Big 12 at the expense of Texas, which is arguably the best job with the best resources in college football, which, by the way, now look at how the Big 12 shapes up. Oklahoma seems to be kind of struggling to move forward. Baylor, who had been emerged as a power, is going through a scandal, and it's hard to expect that Baylor's not going to take a back step. Texas is built very well, going the way Charlie Strong would have if he doesn't get this turned around and get another year. Charlie Strong, at the very least, has left the program better than he found it. I just have a hard time believing that Tom Herman go, you know what, I'm staying at Houston with lesser facilities, with a lesser footprint, with a lesser opportunity as a non-Power 5 school. I mean, it's not like we're saying, is this Houston versus Texas Tech, or is this Houston versus even TCU. This is Houston versus Texas we're talking about. I mean, the idea that Tom Herman would turn down that to stay at Houston just doesn't seem to make much sense if you're being realistic.
Yeah, but Houston's closer to a national title than Texas is.
This year, I mean, if Tom Herman was coaching Texas and not Houston, it might be a different situation. I mean, look at all the factors that Houston needs to have fall in line for them just to have a hope of getting in the playoff. They need to run the table. There is no margin for error, and then they need help. I mean, look, I think Houston deserves to be in the playoff consideration. Certainly, if they beat what would be a 10-2 Louisville team at the end of the year at home. But they are going to need somebody from the Pac-12 to lose. That would be Washington. They're going to need help either from Washington losing or either a combination of the Big Ten or SEC stumbling along the way. And then, all the things have to line up. It's not that way when you're the powerhouse program at a Power 5 school. You just don't – your margin for error is just not as slim at that point.
Good stuff, Bruce. Enjoy the weekend. Always great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dan.
That's Bruce Feldman, Fox Sports College Football Insider.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.